The first would be what is called a fideistic apologetic. Fideism means faithism, and faith is certainly a very good thing in the Christian life. It is trust in God. And so a fideistic apologetic says something like this: we shouldn't employ offensive apologetics. We shouldn't seek to make the case for Christian theology. Well, why not? Consider what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2. Spiritual truths are spiritually revealed. Spiritual truths are known through the work of the Spirit, and fideists insist not necessarily through arguments and reasons per se. So we shouldn't endeavor to give reasons. That's not to say that the reasons are in themselves bad, but they're simply ineffective. On the flip side, they insist that we shouldn't either employ a defensive strategy, that is, answer objections, because again, spiritual truths are spiritually revealed and spiritually understood, and so our arguments, the fideist insists, is not going to do much work at all to convince the unbeliever. Well then, of course, the third strategy would be, ought we critique their worldview? Suppose you're speaking to an atheist, and give them reasons to doubt atheism? Well again, the fideist says, no, unfortunately. That's not going to be effective at all. The fideist wants to insist that knowledge of God is not based primarily in reason, but in trust. And so what they want to do is exemplify a sort of life that is very attractive. So rather than giving a rational apologetic, they want to give more of a practical apologetic. Most apologetics, however, has been done rationally with reasons and arguments in the history of the church. So there are three other methods that are very relevant. Presuppositional apologetics agrees with the fideist that we shouldn't employ either the offensive or defensive strategy because, again, reasoning about Christian theology with unbelievers is going to be unfruitful since the truths of Christian theology are known by the revelation of the Spirit. But they do say that we ought to employ the polemical strategy. So that would mean, for a presuppositionalist, if he is talking to an atheist, he would give the atheist reasons for doubting his atheism, leaving him in a place of crisis, realizing that his worldview is defunct and opening him up to receiving the gospel. Classical apologists take a slightly different approach. They employ what might be called a two-step apologetic. They're in favor of doing offensive apologetics, that is, making the case for Christian theology, but they want to be clear that we have to do it in two distinct steps. The first step is to give philosophical reasons for God. And the second step is to give historical reasons for Jesus and the resurrection. And so they want to make a case for Christian theology, but specifically in those two steps. Now, given that we can do offensive apologetics, they would also like to do defensive apologetics, that is, answer the objections that skeptics might have. And then thirdly, they would want to employ polemical theology, that is, to critique rival worldviews. So classical apologists are open to approaching this from every angle. Finally, evidential apologists are very similar to classical apologists, except they think that we can do offensive apologetics in just one step. So instead of two distinct steps, making the case for God and then making the case for Christ, we might just more effectively make the case for Christ, as apparently the apostles would do. Make the case for the historicity of the resurrection, let's say, with non-believers. You don't have to argue first with an atheist that God is before you argue that, historically speaking, God raised Jesus from the dead. They then, of course, would want to do the defensive strategy, that is, answer any objections that might arise. And then evidential apologists are also open to employing the polemical strategy as classical apologists are. I myself endorse evidentialist apologetic, and I follow that in this course.